News, sports, AccuWeather, and more. Wake up with the information you need on WKOK Sunrise on News Radio 1070 WKOK and WKOK.com.
Good morning. This is WKOK Sunrise. I am Jennifer Wakeman, sitting in for the vacationing Mark Lawrence. Mark has gone off to join the Canadian Mounted Police. Hopefully he will return on Monday. With me in the studio this morning is Cindy Moyer. She's a licensed social worker. And Cindy, you have created a very interesting, not a game, a very interesting set of cards, I guess is the best way to describe them, yes?
Yes, we call it a conversation guide. We're very careful not to call it a game because it's a very serious topic, and we want to make sure that people are focused on the intent of it. We did create it in the shape of elephant footprints, trying to add a little bit of levity to it, to a very daunting topic that no one wants to talk about.
Yes, because there's definitely an elephant in the room with us right now, and that's the name of the cards. But these are, it's sort of, I hate to say end of life. Is that fair? It's how to have these conversations with parents and spouses and other folks who are important to you in your life about how do they want to go through the aging process? How do they want to deal with these things? Is that do a better job than I just did?
That's exactly what we're intending with this. That it's really not just focused on end of life. It's really leading up to end of life. Certainly we know death is something none of us are going to escape. And we hope with Elephant in the Room that we can get people talking earlier in their lives before they've faced a medical crisis or a traumatic disease or even an accident. We want people to be able to be prepared to have conversations with their loved ones so that they can understand what kind of care and treatment they want and what they don't want. And I think that last part is key. We really want people to be able to express the kinds of things they don't want to put themselves through at the end of life or put their loved ones through.
You brought up a good point. I'm sitting here with having just lost my in-laws, both of them in the last 6 months, and I'm thinking of folks who are in their 80s and 90s, but you just mentioned accidents. Anybody should be having this conversation. So if I went out tomorrow and something terrible happened to me in my mid-40s, my husband knows what I want. My children or my parents who would outlive me would know what I want. Mm-hmm. So this is really for anyone.
It is absolutely for anyone. Any adult 18 and over who can understand and rationally think about decisions. We find that if you wait until the medical crisis happens or you're standing around an ICU bed and you're trying to make decisions at that point, you're not thinking clearly because your emotions are taking over, which is a perfectly natural reaction. It is very challenging to make a sound decision when you're distraught, when you're watching your loved ones suffer. So we really want to get people talking before they have to deal with that crisis so they know what to do when the crisis happens.
So what are some of the topics that are covered? And I'm sitting here looking at it, and it looks like there are 4 kind of broad, general, overarching topics, and then there are specifics within each one, correct?
Yes, there are 4 topics to our card deck. The first one is values and beliefs. We really understand that people make their decisions generally from their own values, their own philosophies, their own morals, and their own ethics. So we put some questions in here that are sort of philosophical, things like what makes your life meaningful and purposeful? What kinds of things would you hate to have to give up? Things that are really personal to the person dealing with elephant in the room. Then we also have people and places, which is an important category because we talk about who's going to be there to help care for you? Who's going to be your decision maker if you're unable to speak and make decisions? And where would you like your care given? Do you want to stay in your home? Do you want to go to a nursing home? One question we have is what decisions or promises do you think people asked of their loved ones that they can't possibly keep? And the most popular one is, don't put me in a nursing home. But everyone is going to get to a point at some point where you need extra help, and maybe you do need to go to a nursing home. Then we have definitions and resources, which is really a category trying to get people to talk about things they really may not understand, like define hospice, or what is palliative medicine, or what are the criteria to get onto hospice care? Something that people just don't normally talk about. Where are your community resources to help you keep your loved one at home? And then the last category is really the toughest one. It's called complex care. It's aptly named because these are questions that really delve deeply into the different kinds of situations people might face, whether someone has end-stage dementia or someone's got a cancer diagnosis, really traumatic things that people live through and end up dying from. So we really want people to try to work through those really meaty questions.
So not only can you discover what you might personally want, what your family members might personally want, it can also be informational, because I know in dealing with my father-in-law, my husband and his sisters were going through, and they were, well, exactly what's the difference between going to a hospice facility versus going to a rehab facility, and how are these things different? And they're sort of, the end game ultimately, I suppose, is the same, because it's the same for all of us. We will all die, but how you get there is very different in those two tracks. And they didn't really understand that, or maybe they did, I'm not entirely sure, but it became very clear to them once they started talking about it. And they were fortunate. There were folks in the hospital who were able to have that conversation with them and give them that information. But this can also maybe lead someone to say, I don't really know how that works, and maybe I should look into that now so I know what my options are. Is that
Exactly, yes. And you brought up assisted living, and a lot of times people don't understand assisted living is all private pay. So if you can't afford it, you're not going to be able to have that option. We do have a couple of questions in here that asks you to define what is assisted living versus what is a nursing home, what's the different kind of care level, and whether or not you can keep someone at home or not. You really have to really gauge all of your talents and your abilities and your time in order to consider keeping someone at home.
So what really led you? What was the impetus for creating something like this? Was it just years of experience and watching people sort of muddle through this and not having these conversations, or kind of how did this all get going? Because it's sort of a brilliant idea.
Well, thank you. The catalyst for me was when I was caregiving for my uncle. He was a second father to me. He had no children of his own, so I was his power of attorney. I was his healthcare advocate. He had a very quick health decline in 2008 into 2009, and he was very specific in not wanting certain things. I had to battle with his primary care physician, which was very uncomfortable for me because I was, brought up a generation, you respect the doctors, which of course we do. And it was very hard for me to go up against the doctor to get him to sign a hospice order for my uncle, even though my uncle was asking for that. And when that all ended and my uncle died, I said to my husband, who's a longtime nurse, we've got to make this easier for people. We have to make it easier to advocate for our loved ones' decisions. We're advocating for their decisions. It shouldn't be this difficult. And then over the course of 11 years, my husband, as a hospice nurse, would often come home and say, I had to talk about the elephant in the room because no one else had brought it up yet. So all of those things compounded in my brain, and I kept thinking, we've got to come up with something to get people to start talking. So we came up with Elephant in the Room, trying to get some cards in front of people so they have something to hold on to, something they can talk about that will lead to more and more questions and discovery.
Okay, so I guess some of this is, I'm looking at it going, this would have been so helpful to be able to know what somebody wants and to understand what the misconceptions are. You brought up an interesting point when you were saying you had to fight with your uncle's primary care physician, because sometimes it depends. We were fortunate with my father-in-law. There were different doctors saying, they sort of got all the angles. But if you have a doctor who is very much, I want my patient to go down this path, regardless of what said patient wants, and maybe, that's not necessarily the doctor's fault. That's their personal set of values and beliefs. That's what they feel like is their job to do. It can get very confusing if you don't have someone to guide you through it.
It can be very confusing. And if you're in a hospital situation where you're seeing 3 and 4 different specialists for something, they have the electronic health record, but that doesn't mean they're all talking. And that's where it really falls back to the family members, the healthcare advocate, to really advocate for the patient's wishes if they're not able to speak for themselves.
So where can someone find the elephant in the room? I have one here, but I'm not sharing it. So if you want your very own, where can you get it?
The easiest way to find us is go to caringchoices.org. And we do have a link on our webpage there that says Elephant in the Room. Just click on that. It'll take you right to our Elephant in the Room webpage, and you can order them from there.
That's wonderful. So they're kind of cute. They are big fat elephant. They look like elephant feet, and they're different colored based on whatever the category is. So, right. It's kind of like the sleepover game my children play with the, let's ask, silly questions. Which you prefer, Coke or Pepsi? Well, this is a little more serious than that.
This is a lot more serious, yes.
But it is a good way to sort of at least get folks talking, even if it's, and you're not saying this is going to make it comfortable.
No, it's not going to make it comfortable. What we do know from research with people who have had these kinds of discussions is that it makes the decision making a little easier. and it makes bereavement and grief a little easier on those who survive.
Wow. Cindy Moyer, thank you so much for creating this. Thank you for coming and sharing it with us. And hopefully some folks can have these conversations before they have to have these conversations.
We certainly hope so. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. WKOK News is coming up next.